Hi everyone, I'm Matt from Looking to Bitcoin, and today we're going to be looking at where Bitcoin might peak in the next bull cycle. To do this, we'll be using a number of resources, all freely available on lookintobitcoin.com, your number one source for Bitcoin information. If you haven't already, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. So right now, we're just on the BTC USD weekly chart here on TradingView, and as a lot of you probably like to speculate internally, where might Bitcoin peak next cycle? Obviously, it's the million-dollar question, and obviously no one actually knows the answer, but we can have some fun. We can do some dubious speculation, try and make an educated guess where and when Bitcoin might peak in the following cycle. So to get started, I actually asked some AI, see if that could give me some insight, and the AI predicted $200,000 or more, not a bad price. We could then go on to some look into Bitcoin charts, such as the price forecast tools. Now, this one's a little bit more complicated as we can't really predict what the terminal price is going to be, as well as the other topping chart metrics we have on this price forecast tools. So rather than using that, we could look into some other ones, such as the Bitcoin Investor tool, which is the 2-year moving average, and in this case, multiplied by 5, this red line, which is historically called price action tops as well. As well as this, we have the golden ratio multiplier, which every single cycle peaks at just a lower band than it did in the previous one. So we'll have a look at that as well. We can even take a look at one of Bitcoin's more famous or potentially infamous market value charts, and that is the stock to flow model, which tries to accurately give a fundamental value of Bitcoin based on the supply and demand of the cryptocurrency. So as we can see, in every cycle, Bitcoin has actually reached or surpassed the stock to flow model predicted value. So in the most recent cycle, for example, it predicted a fair value of around $60,000, which we surpassed quite comfortably. In the next cycle is actually predicting a value of $560,000. So pretty interesting to see if we'll ever reach that value in the next upcoming cycle. But as much as this tool is based on predicting the future price of Bitcoin, it has actually been pretty accurate as well at predicting the timing of Bitcoin's price peaks. Following these halving events, which we can see with these gray vertical dashed lines here, as the stock to flow model increases following this, as this is a average stock to flow value, the Bitcoin halving results in the inflationary rate of Bitcoin decreasing by 50% or going in half. But as this line is averaged out to account for the miners adjusting to this decrease in new supply, we can see as Bitcoin tops out historically, it's been towards the tail end of this stock to flow price model value ceasing to increase. So around a year after the halving actually occurs, we can see in every single one of Bitcoin's cycles, this has been a fairly good time to potentially consider taking some profits on your Bitcoin purely by looking at a time-based duration strategy. But we can see as this predicts a potential topping out of around mid-2025, give or take a few months. Of course, the halving can't be predicted exactly as the actual halving date changes frequently depending on current mining output. But we can see if this is anywhere close to being accurate, then we could see a Bitcoin price peak mid-2025 at around $560,000. Again, not one I would complain at. And the logarithmic growth curves, which aren't quite fitting price action now, but we actually have a way we can adjust these a little bit to fit price action a little better. Of course, there is also the possibility that Bitcoin could reach gold's market cap, which if it did, we'd see Bitcoin at around $600,000, which again would be amazing. But is that a bit optimistic? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But if we just go back onto the BTC USD weekly chart here on TradingView, we can actually use a number of private TradingView indicators that you can receive with your Look into Bitcoin subscription. And we can actually adjust these and use these to try and predict where and when we could top out next cycle. So to begin with, as we discussed, the Bitcoin Investor tool. Now, this is the 2-year moving average, this green line, as well as the 2-year moving average multiplied by 5, which is this red line. Now, obviously, we can't predict where a moving average is going to be multiple years into the future. So this is where we can have some dubious speculation and some crude guesstimates. But if we just zoom out a little bit, and let's pretend that the 2-year moving average multiplied by 5 followed the same kind of pattern it did in the previous cycle we've just experienced. So as we bottomed out, it decreased a little bit before increasing. And if we just overlay that onto the current 2-year moving average multiplied by 5, and I'll just color that red so we can see, we can look and say Bitcoin peaked just as it was topping out about here, which would give us a price of between $430,000 US and $270,000 US, which again, I'm not going to complain at. That would be pretty nice. So if we also look at when that top might occur, if we follow the previous pattern of the investor tool, that would occur in around mid, maybe late 2024. So only a couple years to wait for that. If we then load up the logarithmic growth curves, which we looked at before, we can see, as I said, on the Look Into Bitcoin site, these are a little outdated as they're not accounting all of current price action. But with this TradingView indicator, you can actually adjust the calculations a little bit like I have done here, which gives a great overview of where we could actually top out with some more accurate logarithmic growth curves. So if we just zoom in a little bit here, we can see in the previous cycle, we didn't actually reach the exact top of this logarithmic growth curve. So we'll be a little conservative and we'll say we may only reach this second white band we see here. And what we could maybe do is actually overlay previous bull cycles from the bottom, assuming we have already bottomed in price, which we maybe have, maybe haven't, who knows. So if we just get a bar pattern for that, we can actually overlay that and see how that would line up with the logarithmic growth curves. So if we just overlay this onto the current price action, we can see that actually fits fairly nicely. But as we said, we'll be a little conservative. We don't want to be too greedy. If we just bring this down a little bit to assume that these white lines will continue at a fairly steady trend to maybe here or so, we could see that this, following the previous 2015, 2016, 2017 cycle, would see us top out at around $350,000 at around mid-2025. So a little later than the investor tool, but what if we followed the market cycle of the 2018 to 2022 cycle, and if we just overlay that in green, if we put that over current price, it may break the logarithmic bands a little bit, but we'd actually hit this middle line, so it fits fairly accurately, and that would put us at around $200,000 as a potential peak for Bitcoin in late 2025. So maybe 1 point to the AI on that one because that was that prediction, but if we just remove all of these once again and look at the golden ratio multiplier, we can see one interesting point to note here is we've actually hit this bottom line on the golden ratio multiplier for the first time in Bitcoin's price history. So maybe this is a strong level of support that many investors are watching. And this line is a 350 period moving average. Traditionally, this is used on the daily time frame, but I've just loaded this up on the weekly. So maybe the 350 weekly moving average is one we need to keep an eye on. But again, if we just assume that it doesn't hit the previous peak that it did in the last cycle, the previous line that it topped out at. So in 2017, we hit this yellow line. In 2021, we hit this orange line. So let's assume we only managed to reach the blue line in the next cycle. So if I actually just remove the plots of those two, and again, if we dubiously speculate and say that we could potentially follow the exact same path with this moving average that we did in the previous cycle and topped out just in the tail end of this and apply that to the current moving average we see here, and I'll just change that so it's a more accurate color, we could see just before this starts peaking out was where our actual final top was, which would be in late 2025, potentially early 2026, at around $400,000 to $500,000. So again, not a price I would complain at. So just to summarize, on-chain metrics, technical analysis, psychological levels, and fundamental factors all have influence in where Bitcoin may peak, and we have predictions varying wildly from $100,000 to $600,000, but of course all of this is dubious speculation and just having a little bit of fun. Realistically, we need to account for the possibility that Bitcoin may never reach new all-time highs, or it may reach $1 million in the next cycle. As I said, we should try to be more reactive to what the market is presenting us rather than being too rigid in our predictions. But we can say, given Bitcoin's tendency to follow a 4-year price action cycle, we can loosely say that the next price peak could occur in November or December 2025, as historically this is how long it takes Bitcoin to go from peak to peak, bottom to bottom. So if we were to peak in line with the previous cycles, around Q4 2025, or around a 3-year wait before we reach that. If you like this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can also consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to live charts, in-depth newsletters, indicator alerts, private TradingView scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. You also may be able to use some of these market cycle and on-chain charts to come up with a bit more of an accurate prediction than I managed to come up with today. And if you do, please let me know in the comments down below or on social media, on Twitter, we're at lookintobtc. Let me know your price predictions for the next Bitcoin cycle and where and when you think price could peak. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.